everyone. Welcome to the stoa. Hope everyone's doing well today. We have Jill Nephew returning. Jill is the founder of Inquire and the chief architect of an inquiry technology that restores, protects, and enhances human natural intelligence. And as a public benefit corporation, Inquire is on a mission to use their natural intelligence technology to empower people to win the race against insanity and create a world that makes sense. um, and today's session is called the art of truth, and we're going to talk about sort of the crisis around what is true and how to establish what is true. So I'm just going to hand the keys to the stoa over to Jill, and she's going to give a presentation, a talk, and then it's going to be an open Q&A which she'll administer, and then she'll take me in at the end. We're here for 60 minutes in total. So that being said, Jill, welcome back, and tag your it.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me for another session. Thanks for everybody for attending. I'm going to try another experiment in my communication styles. This time I'm not going to do a presentation. I'm going to be rolling with this idea of trying not to race through too much material and go at the speed of intelligibility from you all and kind of slow down on that. So what I'd really love is to kind of monitor the chat and kind of be paced by everyone. So maybe like an ongoing question everyone can kind of hold is like, is what I'm saying making sense to you? Because I really would like to start to or continue to put these concepts into really easy to grasp, as easily as possible to grasp formulations, and really just keep getting feedback on that, because I think it's so important to try to help people come up to speed on what all of a sudden seems like we need to educate ourselves on with what's going on in the world. So that's my request to you all. It's just I'll just type in anything you want clarification on, or jumble my words, and we'll get as far as we can get. I have a where I think I can get, but I think the important thing is just that we get as far as we get in an intelligible way, and then I can follow up if we don't get it all in. Cool. Okay. So I sense, maybe a lot of people sense, what's happening in the last few months is this rapid acceleration of a lot of the issues that the stoa has talked around. A lot of ways this has been framed. A lot of ways the whole culture is talking about what's happening to the erosion of our institutions, erosion of what we believe in, erosion what's true and how to establish what's true. And with the recent developments in these particular AI technologies that are all over the news, it's almost a perfect storm of accelerating what was already in play in terms of threatening or bringing to a head this distinction, this ability, this sense we have of that we should be able to together establish something we're pointing out as true. So I think that the times we're in are so complex and slippery. It's never been slippery. It's more slippery and more difficult to track what may or may not be the wrong direction right now. Especially, I'm talking about the technologies and what do we trust? What tools do we use? How should we interface with all this stuff? What's good? What's bad? How do we navigate what is getting between us and each other in this information layer that we're interacting with, be it the internet, be it these tools, be it the academy, and the way science is done, this layer in between us. How do we navigate that? And I think that the principles of how to navigate it are actually simple enough for anyone to grasp. Like, I think the principles are quite simple, so I'm going to be trying to keep coming back to those. They're almost like a compass, like we're at a time where we're just in this tumultuous, crazy waves, but we do have very simple tools that are reliable compasses that we can just keep applying and keep coming back to and keep applying. It's like the way forward. And so I want to, I'll be trying to lay that out, come back to it. And I do hope this talk I hope we get there in our hour together, that people feel a sense of hopefulness because I'm hopeful. I know there's a way through. Um, and I know that it's possible. It's totally within the realm of plausibility that humanity figures this out and ends up with it kind of in better shape than we've ever been. In some ways, I think of this as uh if anyone's familiar with the term impedance match, where something matches just right, that it kind of vibes with the thing, it sticks to the thing. It's like if you want to remove a grease stain, you add some oily thing, you add orange oil to remove grease. You add something similar to it, but almost slipperier to get underneath it. And in some ways, that's what I think is going on right now. I think that the large language models, the AI technology might be that thing that we can get this clear separation between what already hasn't been working and what's really going to start not working even more. So like it's just going to be maybe this big separation going on culturally between kind of that layer of removing the grease, leaving behind, understanding greases, understanding how to negotiate that interface. So that's my abstract intro. And I don't, again, I'm kind of just feeling my way into this. So I don't see any chat questions yet. So I'll just dive in here. So the art of truth. First, it stands to reason I better define that slippery term truth. What is true? And I'm going to do this just by making some claims, and then this would probably be a fun thing to really dive into. But I want to get past a lot of the theory stuff, which I could spend the whole talk on, and get more to the action stuff where I think the hope is. But so I'm just going to state this as true that what truth is a proxy for reality, a proxy for what our shared experience moment to moment as it unfolds. Like the truth is anything that adds up with that. Like when that it is the and that unfolding ever present reality is a constantly moving target. The universe, the evolution of the universe doesn't stand still. It's constantly emerging new things. And as we think we've grasped something and we've turned it into something that we can hold on to conceptually, the world drifts away, and then we have to reattach. And that is uh, in cognitive science called the binding problem, that we can do that we can take our senses, our whole history, our body, everything, pull it all together and make it a consistent, that we all agree on is consistent interpretation of what's going on right now. And it's and and the thing that makes this first thing that makes this really slippery is that we do it so easily, so effortlessly, we don't realize how ingenious it is. Like it is absolutely mind-blowingly complicated and complex, and no one has a clue how to codify it, how to create it, how to make a system that does it. We just do it. So there's this maybe the first gap that I would love to get everybody over is if the world could have the same respect for what this organism can do that a AI researcher has that thinks they can try to build something that can do that, and comes to realize, wow, there's a lot more to this than I have experienced. I experience it as effortless, but when I try to understand it, I see how vast it is. That gap gives us a certain kind of respect for what we do. Um, and a testament to it is that when we walk around in natural environment, we all agree on what we see. Like if somebody points, if someone says there's a tree over there, there's a cow over there, we expect, unless they're lying intentionally, that that's reliable. And that ability to just pull out what's going on moment to moment accurately, what Stephen Wolfram would call our coarse graining, is incredibly reliable, and many will argue is the foundation of every form of truth that we kind of subscribe to. Like at the heart of a scientific insight or scientific truth is using that machinery, that ability of ours to look at and take in patterns or input or experiences, however you want to refer to it, and reliably detect, kind of what stands out and what's the shape of the thing. That works. If it didn't work, we wouldn't have engineering. If it wasn't reliable, science wouldn't work. So that's another testament that comes from this ability. That doesn't come from an analytic sense. It doesn't come from our mathematics. It comes from leveraging our ability to do this. And so that's all fine and good. Like, what's the problem? We're just going through life like every other living thing, and we're continually recognizing our surroundings and returning to truth, returning to reality. And the problem is that when we are exchanging interpretations with each other, which is what we do as social animals, we run simulations in a sense in each other's minds by describing things. We take that at face value based on trust, and that's kind of our superpower, that we can form networks and trust each other. We don't have to see whatever someone else sees. We can take it at face value, take it in as true without seeing it ourselves. And this allows us to move very rapidly and align ourselves very rapidly towards shared goals. And it's a superpower we don't want to lose. But it's, as I mentioned in the previous Emerge podcast I was on, it is it rests on trust. That trust could be violated, and then all of a sudden that whole thing blows up. So the problem we have, of course, with this superpower is that we are able to take in things that aren't true. People can lie, they can fabricate, or they can just be feverish or panicked or quickly surveying their surroundings or drawing false inferences from other false inferences. If the time wasn't taken to carefully um, bind one's uh, conceptualizations into what's going on right now, like if that hasn't happened in a mind, it quite easily can just even inadvertently start putting out stuff that could not be bound, that is not true, that doesn't represent reality. We call that confabulation. That's very easy for us to utter confabulations. It's also, sorry. So I was going to make another point about that, but I've lost it. Right. Okay. So this part's really important, that for optimal trust, for like the kind of peak truth, you'd want every person in a network to be able to do that work, to be able to do that cognitive work of attempting to bind their utterances um, to reality, one way or another. So scientists do this with their observations. They work very hard at trying to bind their observations to their description of reality that we take in. And that's good science. And then science where that doesn't happen is bad science. That starts to point at part of the problem we're having right now, which is that the algorithms that we're interacting with, these large language models, are not able to do this. In fact, all things that simulate humans that we would mistake for human, all the bots or anything like it, aren't able to do this and aren't doing this because they don't have the machinery, they don't have the experience, they aren't bound to reality in that way. They are taking lifted information out of in the form of images or utterances or data, and then reconstruing or re-putting together something that sounds like reality. That was the other point I want to make. So the superpower we have, coming back to that, we have like a little alarm system that says that everything's cool as long as what you're telling me is plausible. Like, does it add up with my experience and does it seem plausible? We don't say is absolutely true. We move through life through what's plausible. And so the other problem we have is that there's been plenty of systems that turn out kind of silly statistics or BS, messages, but the large language models that we're interfacing with right now are especially dangerous because they are manipulating language so that it's of the form that sounds plausible. It's just not, you just can't ground it into reality. So this is getting at this big problem that we have already been inundated with. When we have something that can't be grounded into reality, can't be bound to our direct experience or anyone's direct experience and grounded into reality, we kind of call that nonsense. We've already been being bombarded with nonsense. Like this is kind of, the problem of the internet. It's a problem of, all the ridiculous, we've already been seeing this happen. Just the games getting more and more sophisticated now, where it's going to be harder and harder to detect when it's happening to us, to the point of, as I also claimed in the Emerge podcast, impossible for us to detect, because if we have not actually existed in the perspective it's representing, we can't detect that it's not plausible. So I'll give you a really simple example. Like, if I'm never been to another state and someone tells me I'm looking out my window and there's an oak tree, that's plausible, and they tell me this, I don't know. How could I possibly verify that that's not plausible unless I've actually been there? And that is the problem with these things, is that no one's been everywhere and they're representing everywhere, and nowhere is actually plausible. So if you can find in these systems where they perfectly overlap a person, an expert who's standing right where these systems say that they're representing, that expert, that person can say, I've been, in that spot. There is not an oak tree there, and that's what's happening, is that people say that when these things are trying to represent their expertise and they have deep knowledge and really understand where they are, these systems are not representing an accurate view. So um so this is kind of the time we're in, is that these things are not only slippery and difficult, but they're incredibly fast and cheap to generate. And so we're in this really terrifying time of having being kind of like this explosion of how we might start encountering this quality of information. Um, and this creates this giant burden for us to attempt to navigate our way back to what's true. And so with that kind of background, uh, how do we do that? What is there a way to look at, like, how do we navigate from something that is just plausibly wrong, but invisibly kind of quietly in there, to establishing that basically we've been conned, right? And so this plausibly wrong, ability, this is like the heart of the con job, the mind control of propaganda, the cults, the false memories. Like, it's all the same machinery. It's that it got in, it didn't set off our alarms, it's plausible, but it's not in our best interest. And and it's harming us, but we can't detect it. It's slippery like that. So because we don't know, right? So what can we do in the face of that? What are we armed with to try to not fall down this path of being led into this alternate world where our world's on fire, but we can't even ground into that because we are just lost in this web of ungroundable implausibilities, like ultimately implausibilities. And so that is where I'm titled the talk, "The Art of Truth," comes in. We do have a um, a weapon against this. And so one more piece before I go into that. So the other thing that makes this exceptionally slippery, and maybe you'll have a sense of this, is that the way our the way our minds, the way our memories is arranged, is that it operates by association, and and it really can't get past that. It's just this biological limitation. Like, we live in these corridors, and when we say something's plausible, we have at our disposal only what we can associate with, like only our associations at any given time. So this is how we can kind of live these duplicitous lives. We can, and we can believe one thing at one time and another thing at another, or lose sight of great truths and kind of feel like we, have these transcendent states and come back to like never happened. It's that we operate through what's salient is what's hitting us. And unless we have some sort of reminder, it's like a whiteout in an airplane. As soon as there's no ability to see the ground, you're just spinning, right? So we're in these corridors of kind of just spinning in information. So the art of truth is fundamentally getting at what to do about that problem. So I promised a little bit of historical context here, and I think this is probably a good time to bring this in. The term is borrowed from Francis Yates' Art of Memory, who is talking historically about the time of the Renaissance and what was going on then. And and so what the term refers to, and this the term of art refers to, the art of truth, uh, are this class of information technologies that were first documented in her book in the 1300s. It's not clear how much further they went back, but quite high profile fellow Raymond Lull was a theologian and considered the father of information technology. And he built these systems out of concentric paper rings. They're machinations, they're mechanical systems. And what you would do with them is you put in your normal associations. You put in the symbols of your life. You put in the representations that you know you can ground or bind to your world. So that's how it works. Like things when you remind yourself of mother, father, cousin, yesterday, breakfast, you're binding it. You're using your own symbols to bind to your own life. Put them into this contraption, and then you start turning the wheels. And what you start to get is novel combinations. And those novel combinations don't obey the same connectedness of the associations. They violate it because they have this. So, in a sense, if you imagine living in a labyrinth, you're leaving down breadcrumbs and you're lifting it out and you're seeing novel combinations. And it's the art of combination. And when you do that, that act starts to show you anything that is implausible that was existing in those different corridors. You'll start to see how they don't add up. So just like a concrete kind of psychological example might be if you're in a really down yourself mood of like, I'm worthless, I can't do anything, and classic CBT might say, well, look around and really look at your life. Let's try to step out from that frame and say, well, didn't you do this and this and this? And is that really plausible? It'd be like the simplest way to understand maybe an example of this. And you would say, I see that there is evidence against this. And now you might get curious, as to how did this arise and where did it come from? But the ultimate uh, um, leverage point, the technology, is about making those things available that you curate and you make, and you are able to bring these collisions together. And so in a sense, the art of truth is less about a synthesis of everything you've seen, but more as it is about a deconstruction, a removal of false inferences. Like it's more of a deconstructive act than a constructive act. It's a corrective act. And so this is why if you're engaging something doing this, so let me give a little more historical context. So Raymond Lull discovered this. And one thing to think about, just that core technology, what it is. You put in the symbols, and something about the relationships going on too. We don't worry about that, but you're figuring out how to re-relate these things in different ways so that you see different patterns, and you can see that the things you had accepted in weren't plausible, and you update your understanding, giving a more gestalt or holistic view, right? And kind of implied that you're going to start to have to come up with these reconstruals that are more representative of a larger whole of your lived experience. So that whole information technology is almost a perfect opposite to a computer system that works on data, which extracts the symbols and it decides what the symbols are that matter, and then puts them into a system. So this is a kind of reverse move where you own those symbols that are reference to your life versus having a kind of a third person perspective in a system. So this is 100% first person versus third person. So that might be a little abstract, but kind of think about these things as kind of complementary. So basically, at the same time, Francis Yates saying this is going on, people are coming up with all kinds of interesting new models, all kinds of interesting new things they saw and ways to articulate it into conceptualizations. And this really became a generator of people creating models, interesting models. So is hypothesized that this is maybe a generator of a kind of explosion of the occult, all these tarot or, astrology, even the scientific versions, the ones that were accepted into the academy and the ones that were excluded. But as a whole, this machinery for kind of having insights and seeing new combinations and seeing new patterns and seeing new ways to formulate models. This is almost like a model breaker and a model emerger, just kind of a seed of emergence. One more little point I'll make about that, which I didn't make earlier, that the binding problem, when we have that sense of having come back to reality, the felt sense of that, I'm just claiming, is the felt sense of insight. It's that sense of, if you think about the times you've had insights, I mean, there's notable insights where you feel like you have some groundbreaking thing, but often the majority of our insights, we're going from something mysterious and ununderstood to very simple and understood. Like it's like the um the monster becomes, the cat under the bed, or that crazy thing terrorizing you tonight was just the string hanging down from your light bulb. It's like you go from something that seems very fabulous and fantastic, maybe to quite ordinary, um because it's understandable, it's intelligible, and it's grounded. So the felt sense of doing this would be an insight process, a sense of having collected yourself, a sense of feeling as though life is manageable and you find your place in it. um, and so, the well, not and so which I haven't told you yet, the history, the arc of these arts of truth, um, little information technologies, as written by Francis Yates, is that the belief is that they're quite widespread, for quite a while, for a couple hundred years, until they were systematically destroyed with the Enlightenment. And there was a huge push um, to discredit them, just remove them, and even before that happened, it's hard to trace them down because there was a sense that, more than a sense, there was a reality that if you're caught doing this kind of stuff, it was considered subversive. And so uh, it was recognized that these arts of truth were heavily like encrypted, encoded, and difficult to understand on purpose, and ultimately found themselves in mystery schools and underground, because of this this fundamental problem of the binding problem. And the fundamental problem of the binding problem is that when you disabuse yourself of, so these plausible falsities that are in us are very powerful, right? That's how we arrange power, is that we buy into, groupthink, and they can be really against our best interests, you brother killing brother, like these the ways our whole world is taken over by these things, is the ways of the power structures in the world. And so this act of deconstructing those, seeing through those, seeing the implausibility of those, is necessarily subversive. You are seeing something that the power structures don't want you to see. And so uh, Raymond Lull, who, again, he's a theologian, and he held that using something like this kind of technology, every person could reveal all the religious truths for themselves. They did not need, um, to come down anymore. Everyone who used these things believed everything would become self-evident. With these things can become self-evident. You don't need to defer to any authority uh, on any topic. So he was so excited about this that he went off to go persuade the Muslims that they could use it to convince themselves that God was good, and got himself stoned to death. Then a couple hundred years later, Giordano Bruno got very excited about this, and wanted to persuade the king of Spain that he didn't need his advisors anymore, and he was burnt at the stake as a heretic, and for basically, it's a little controversial, but the latest I've read on it is that they believe he's burnt at the stake for his belief that there could be lots of planets, not just one, and that it followed from reflections on the nature of God. And that is his beliefs on cosmology or the most correct at the time, and are seen to have been kind of ironic that they came from theological reflections. Uh, so the history of these arts of truth also point out the idea that people were not just using them in isolation, they were trying to coordinate and use them together to suggest these collisions or these ways of bringing in the right combination of disabusing evidence in the form of like thought experiments, hypothetical, what we call like counterfactual or hypothetical thought experiments. So these collisions, right, aren't just about factual. Factual is what happened that we have through association. This is about what's called counterfactual, bringing together things that didn't happen. But if you do the thought experiment, you can see the problem with your over interpretations. And when these things were on trial, they said that it was against kind of the logical positivism move that was shaping up of the day of why on earth could you ever think anything useful could come out of something counterfactual when there's all you need is factual. So it was kind of considered philosophically wrong, a wrong move as well, to just to engage the mind this way. We now know that this ability is incredibly useful, and that is the basis that we can come to see, new patterns. It's our ability to take multiple perspectives, not just one. But the idea is that people were not just using them in isolation; they were using them together and sharing these things quietly, secretly, underground, um, and um, and that that all had to be very well protected. So let me see where I'm at right here. Right. So the big problem. So the big problem is that another obvious way, maybe the most obvious way we could really do the art of truth powerfully would be for everybody to be sharing their grounded, bounded experience as the reference points. This is kind of our superpower of, how we um, pass on, our lived experience powerfully, and can get ahead of having to learn by your own mistakes, to be able to run thought experiments or put yourself in the shoes of people that have been in different situations, and start to learn more about the environment than you have to experience directly. But the problem with that is that you have to be transparent about your life. And what we're in right now is that's really a dangerous thing to do, to be transparent about your life, and it's probably dangerous then too. Um, so because your life is personal, and in the wrong hands, your personal information is not safe. So 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 this is, I believe, if we look at the arc of what happened to the arts of truth, um, the theory is that they went underground into esoteric schools, into mystery schools, and there's even, I believe, Gurdjieff. It looks like Gurdjieff was aware of them and using them, and if you look at some of his recent lectures, he forbid anybody from writing down what was happening behind closed doors, and there was initiation to be able to do this kind of thing, and and he said for anybody who really understands how these things work, they would understand why you keep them secret, why you don't let them out in the world. So this is the problem we have right now, is that our superpower, our ability to come together as an organism with true information, multi-perspectival information that we could use together to construe a world that makes sense, to really get a clear, grounded idea of what's going on here, is also bound to our vulnerability of who we share that information with. Um, so let me see if I want to. Yeah, and just to give some grounded examples of this, I mean, if you look at the R.D. Laing hypothesis of kind of being, the idea that you're in a double bind, you're the person in the family that witnessed something that the family doesn't want out in the open, and so you kind of get demonized for it. Like your experience has to be, suppressed. Or another example is just whistleblowers, right? Just into your career, you saw what happened, and we have protection for whistleblowers. So people owning in the fact that people publish things anonymously, like the power of anonymity. So we're very aware of this idea that we both need this person perspective and we need to know how to protect it. And we need it to not kind of go insane with this ungrounded, unrealistic, or being dupes for every con job out there, and falling for every now simulated human out there. So the only thing kind of that'll save us is, in a sense, to be able to make that distinction is going to eventually going to come down to that principle of that whatever we are taking in as representing true in the world, can it attach to something that's bound to reality? Is there a sensor in the world? Is there a real thing out there that it binds to that we can confirm, is really there? Which sounds kind of wild, but um, so to also make this a little less abstract, if we thought about information technologies today that do this, like a calendar is a great example. Like, it points at a real thing that happens, and we can verify it every time, because if it wasn't, it wouldn't work. We would be showing up for things that weren't happening. So it's a technology that points at a real thing in the world. Weather forecast is a sensor that really is, up there with something measuring the wind, and it's a real thing out there we can point to. And if it weren't working, we'd know it. We'd say that's not right. So it's not like, this is not proposing an anti-algorithmic, anti-computational, anti-information technology counter. It's saying we've got to figure out how to do it differently. We've got to figure out how to ensure that we can exercise the art of truth against what we are consuming in terms of information, or being bombarded with as representations of truth. And in the academy, it's what everyone will tell you who's a good researcher is that you forget about the abstract. That's probably BS. And the next level BS is kind of the intro, because everyone's just kissing up to everybody. And then the conclusions is a little bit of the pitch. And, you go right to the procedures, and then you dig into the appendix, and then you go talk to the graduate students, like, what did you actually do? That's what I need to know. And that's important. And there's really big violations of that happening right now. And so, and it's a big deal, and that's misrepresented, a reproducibility crisis, or, it's considered corrupt or unethical. So that's the other part, that we are used to systems where we expect that to be high fidelity. We expect, if you told me this really happened, it really happened. And if that is not what happened, we are not happy about that. We rule a law to take care of that. That is a loss to your credibility. It's a loss to maybe your even ability to operate freely in the world. Like, we are bound to being truthful about what our experiences are socially, right? That's kind of the basis of how we can function together. So the fact that we don't demand it of our technology is, I feel like, a bit of a mini dark ages we're in right now. And maybe a major dark ages, but I'm seeing it as hopefully a death throes of realizing we made this horrible mistake, the death throes of the mistake, and a realization of this very large mistake. Okay, I'll get to you in a second, Monica. Which is that the Enlightenment, as many know, and I think this is an important distinction, elevated this concept of the truthiness of a third person objective perspective. And 20th century physics, came to realize that by and large, even if you're trying to do, real calculations about the real world, you have to take a point of reference. You don't, the bird's eye view, somehow is intractable. It doesn't work. But if you actually do everything with an explicit point of reference, explicit first, you think first person perspective on the entity, a scalar, then the physics works out. This is the correct way to never lose sight of the fact that once you try to claim anything in that global third person perspective, you're off the rails. So in some sense, the rest of the culture hasn't caught up with that, including many, if not all the other sciences that I hear them talk about. They think they really critique science as if it were still all of it. We're still operating in that kind of Newtonian, what I call Newtonian God's eye view, without realizing that parts of science have rectified that, realized that. So I think that we're in a transition, hopefully, where we realize that it's a that everyone can struggle with both the beauty and the paradox of the fact, because it is wild when you hear about it. Like, how does that even work? It's just like, it's the most beautiful thing I ever learned in studying physics was that it works. That like somehow each point, if you look around its neighborhood, can accurately reconstrue the universe such that you can tell it what it's going to do later. Like that's intrinsic somehow, and it's a mystery. It's just like the great mystery that we all embody that, and we all still participate in what appears to be an objective, agreed reality. Um, so let me see what Monica's question was, and then I will or comment. Let's see. Okay, so that's a good point. And I know me and Monica are going to have a big debate about this tomorrow morning, so we could definitely unpack this later. But there's another important crosscut that, again, may have to just bookmark this for later. But it's really important to make a distinction between different kinds of information. The information that is, we have also been inundated with this Newtonian view that everything is mostly represented with a particle mindset, or a reductive mindset, like that everything's made up of particles or parts, or you can chop things into parts. And what's also lost on most people's interpretation of science is that science done well is very explicit about the, not just the point, but the conditions and the entire state that something is claimed to be true. So science done well is attempting to describe thoroughly that binding of, I was here, I did this experiment here under these conditions, this is what I saw, and this is my explanation for what I saw. And outside of that, it loses validity. But there are certain things that science has discovered that seem to be incredibly robust, and those are like gravity. Gravity is the best, simplest example that you don't really have to worry about where you are on the planet. The gravitational constant, I mean, it varies, but there's gravity is everywhere. It seems like every time we measure, you get the same thing. So there's these relational qualities. There's something special about relational qualities. There can be that are, in a sense, universal, that are beyond guessing, in as much as we know them to so many decimal points, there's no point, and there's a quality to them, that they're about relationship. That'll be a fun whole separate talk we can get into. But a lot of what science is doing, and a lot of what we're bombarded with, are these people taking what they see, articulating using that coarse graining ability they have, building a model, and then trying to make that thing apply everywhere. That is like also what hopefully is the death throes of what we've just been through, is to think that that is good science, to not bind those models directly to that grounded context, and be very careful to make a distinction between, have you validated that what is the extension, where else is that model valid, is not good science. So that was a little abstract. So now let's with 15 minutes left here, I think I can get back to what to do here. So let me see if I'll tell one more little bit of the story, I think. So this is just my own connections. A lot of these are my own connections, kind of I'm not a specialist historian on these things, and it's not the thrust of what I spend all day thinking about. These are the things I noticed I thought were curious. So Leibniz, who's one of the fathers of calculus, he kind of invented his form, and Newton had his form. The lore goes that he was actually attempting to rebuild one of these things he'd heard about, that were some universal calculator. He said, wouldn't it be great if we had a way, let's just sit down and compute, or let's just sit down and calculate, which I might translate today as something like, let's all sit down and make sense of things together. Because just based on what I've seen of the evidence of the old systems, they did not appear to be bound to mathematics. That was a subset. That was a not the original formulation of the time that you would only restrict science to observation and remove experience. These things predate that move. This is basically when experience and observation were still bound together. So the things you're representing can be like, symbols of my state, how I feel, relationships, what's going, not just, the idea of how do you deal with moving bodies, or how do you deal with space time and predicting evolution of spatial things. And Leibniz is active in the calculus of variation, so you can see a lot of the same, maybe the same seeds came from this idea of the art of truth, which is again bound to the first person perspective, finding its way into what we're currently using as the most powerful forms of science. So maybe I think at this point, I want to talk about, yeah, could we do this today? Could we bring it back? Is it time to, like, could we, uh, what's the landscape of something like this today? And this was brought to all this actually is brought to my attention by somebody who has been really eagerly kind of studied this for years. When he saw the Inquire system, he said, I think this might be one of these things. And I didn't know what he's talking about. And then after reading up, I could definitely see an agreement in the architecture and the way it's shaped. That when, as I've said in previous talks, what are you actually doing when you're trying to do this grounding, or do this, solve this? What's the magic of what we do? We have to do something. There's something magical happening in our mind that opens to our direct experience, to bind it to everything we know, to our senses. Is that openness going on? There's that openness to everything that we embody, and that's got to be all the way down to our DNA, right? That's everything that we embody. Some form has to take conceptualization and interface to that. And what I've said is that those are the open forms, that that's a very special linguistic form. There are special linguistic forms, the open forms of inquiry and thought experiments that ask us to look into, see, sense, and experience a kind of first person thought experiment that put us into that frame. So there's like this invocation or evocation, of that doing that the open forms enable. And so, as many of you know, that's what the basis of the Inquirer architecture is, to collect these open forms and test and curate them. And so the other part of now, so I'm kind of speaking to the architecture more in these talks. The other part of the Inquire platform was intentionally built so that there would be this very clean separation between people's personal information, which is kept on out of the internet, is on your own device, on your own. You can own it, hold it. You curate it, you protect it, you decide who you share it with. Is separate from what is participating in what is becoming a more and more dangerous place to put your personal information. Um, and so up until recently, the Inquire framework that, as we've been putting out there, has really been focused on people trying to work with their own direct experience, and work with the forums and work with everything to do this with their own autobiographical memory. And what we are going to be launching soon is a whole suite of tools that are really set up to help people do this collectively and with others. And a really simple example that we've been wanting to do forever, which is the most obvious thing, is to really make it very easy for anybody, like just anybody, to access good questions, to ask people in their lives that they feel like people need to hear what this person has to say, kind of champion them, be it like a respected person in the community, or just someone you look up to, or just someone that you're related to, you love, you want to, like, not forget your own heritage, your own history, make it really easy for someone to, like, help another person do that or encourage them to do it. And then all the tools they need to protect that, to figure out all the, walk them through what can you do with this, and how can we help you do what you need to do with it, which would be supporting existing trust networks, supporting existing social networks, tools, helping people find ways to really give them everything they got to do this collective grounding and situating exercise together. and also just tools for people to come together in a kind of in a form where they could each do a multiple perspective, as we've kind of shown on the um, showcased before, what we're calling campfires. This idea that people can very easily, anyone can pull together just like a board game, an ability to set up that kind of thought experiment so that you get multiple perspectives on the same thing, which is a very effective way to quickly start to disabuse yourself of all these maybe over extrapolations or construals. So it's really the next kind of phase of Inquire is to try to give everybody lots, not try, but to give people lots and lots of tools and ways to be able to start to do this kind of work, and hopefully have a lot of really powerful synergies and a lot of ways that people can quickly um, defend themselves against what's coming. And and with the last few minutes, I'll say that um, when I imagine into if be it Inquire or anything else that is doing what I'm envisioning, like what I read and what I think of what that could look like, it gives me tremendous hope because um, not only are you just get coming back to what's true, you're coming back to what's real, and you're restoring this fundamental ability to navigate your personal relationships and trust networks, like to coordinate together again. And there's so many synergies we're missing right now. It's just ridiculous, that people can be mentoring each other. The most obvious one, I mean, old people looking after the children. I mean, people that need to exercise, going doing the yard work. I mean, it's like there's so many natural human synergies that we cut up and boxed up and turned into a marketplace, that the thing that's keeping us from being able to restore that and really build up a very regional, very local way of adapting quickly and super intelligently to what's going on, is to start to restore all that and deconstruct those boxes, right? Deconstruct that that's not the only way. And so in a sense, what I see and what I hope for people is that this is the way this would address kind of the poly crisis is that people will just not know why everything just died. They won't know why all the old systems just kind of started to rot and why people are healthier and living longer, even though our GDP is going down. Like, why do we seem like we don't, we aren't producing as much, but somehow everybody's doing okay, and the planet's doing better. I mean, that's the dream, right? Is that we are all super intelligent. We're great pattern recognizers. You embed us and ground us into the situations we care about. We care, right? When we understand, we care. It's like our superpower. When we understand, we care. And so that would be the hope, is that this would almost be like a rising tides kind of effect. It wouldn't be something overt. No one's going to war, battle, or anything. It's just a rising tides where hopefully there's more ability for people to coordinate, more ability for people to even just really appreciate the people, like not least of which appreciate the people around them in their lives, by hearing their lived experience, which is completely anemic right now, and just this huge reward on both parts that we're just missing for the teller and the listener. We're just so missing that right now. So if nothing more than that, I just think that would be a huge source of satisfaction, but I think much more beyond that, a source of um, restored wisdom, history repeat itself, learning from everybody's experiences together, and coming back from kind of our wayward ways, without giving up what we gained, the knowledge we gained. We don't have to give anything up, So with that, I will yeah, we can only we have a few more minutes, or I'll answer questions for, I guess, until uh 4:15. What is it, 7:15? So we have 15 minutes for questions, unless there is none. Was that kind of obvious to everybody what I just said, or pretty preaching to the choir? Oh, I see a question. Oh, wait a minute, there's a couple. Okay. So how do I think LLMs and AI would change the dimension of thinking and consciousness? That's the question, or the other tools, arts of truth tools. That I'm okay. I'll assume it's the LLM AI tools. How would they change our thinking consciousness? Um, so uh, I think in many ways it'll be more of the same of people. Um, I think that it'll be even more of a drift away of believing. Like my worst nightmare that people don't believe anymore that there was a thing called truth. They just won't believe that such a thing exists. And that may sound weird, but I mean, I think that we're seeing some signs of that of the young digital natives that they're kind of like, "Oh, I don't care about reality. I'm fine. That if you imagine like a video game full of like very compelling, very fascinating, characters in a very beautiful, fascinating world where you're really beautiful and fascinating and everyone's participating in that, then I don't, it's almost like the Matrix that to the extent that, would anybody really choose any, um yeah, on what basis would they choose reality, especially if you could get them the right drugs. So it's a little bit of a um yeah, a little bit of a further weakening of kind of that hardiness that we long for, we don't want to do the work to have of trying to live in reality. Uh, this is back to Susan. Oh, sorry, it looks like okay. Oh, and I think I'm a little lag. Yes, our tools will change aspire interaction with them. In what direction could this go? Okay, right. And then you said, are we conducting experiments now with people who use our inquiry methods? Um, So the way we've been experimenting for years with the system in an individual manner, and we don't ever, people want to give us their data. We really discourage that. So we just ask them about their experience with the system and make sure that they are having useful insights, that things are making sense and nothing bad's happening, that it was helpful, and then we use it ourselves. So we test a lot of stuff with against our own lives, but we don't really need their data for anything because it's just not how the thing was constructed. Nothing in the system uses data. It's all based on explainable stuff and curated, is basically curated from examples from kind of the corpus of humanity and then tested. So that's how we refine the question forms, and testing, meaning we could go into that, but a lot of that semantic testing in a sense that you can actually, one of the easiest ways to see if a question form works is you can actually detect physically, and the quality of thinking change, and then the insights follow. So it's kind of you can almost feel your way along, and other people can feel their way along to a lot of the work on this. And the group stuff, for years we've done a variety of tests. We just kind of haven't gotten back to it. So we've successfully run groups with church groups, with families, with high school students. This is the campfire thing where people come together, and with really great results. People really like it. In kind of a courtyard festival where people could just drop in. We've done it in HR meetings. We've done it in what's called DevOps, so like computer science departments using it. So the forms are very ubiquitous. They can apply them to anything. It's just you can think of them like ways of looking. They really are just help direct your attention. It appears that that's what we use, and people, I've said this everywhere before, but it appears as though if you're trying to make it like physics, you'd say there's kind of like 12 kind of fundamental dimensions to ways we look, and then combinations of those, so you get about 1,000 ways of looking, more or less. And then that's kind of a rough cut. You can make finer distinctions, but rough is often good enough for people, because we you don't, it's not a narrow, it's a broad. So it's like look up, look down, look left, look right, good enough to find the car that's about ready to mow you over. You don't need to be like look exactly at 23 degrees. So yeah, so it can be quite fuzzy, and people do a lot of work to, because we also have so much machinery designed to like look for where stuff doesn't add up, right? That's, well, if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be alive. So, yeah. So the question is, how do we create trust networks now that many people are using LLMs and LLMs are shaping their understanding of truth, or do we just accept truth as grounded in embodiment? I think that one thing that's nice about all this is that uh, that's why it's kind of the death of things. If you look at why don't we get along over, Thanksgiving, it's all this disembodied third person perspective. A lot of our conflicts are when we kind of do that. We're like, Democrats, Republicans, and and so immediately when you take a lot of it, when you just take that first person perspective, that stuff becomes irrelevant anyway. It's just a nonsense, And then what you have, which is really beautiful, um, and there's lots of data supports, and we see it everywhere, is that if you just happen to have a Republican and a Democrat, they hate each other, but they don't know that's what they are, and they do something from first person perspective, you start hearing their story, it becomes easier to ground and understand what what was the kind of I don't like the word trigger so much, but what was the connection that kind of had them lean into that particular model or interpretation. Like you can kind of see what's underneath it. And that becomes just uh, the the foundation that you can start to rebuild those connections and kind of dismiss the nonsense. So in some sense, having worked the system for years, you I think once you get really comfortable with this, there's just a lot of dismissing you do of what people say. You just think, oh, it's another model, another model, another model, like it's like people and you just listen for what you think is there, the stuff underneath it that is fueling that interpretation if they're really putting it out there. So a lot of that is like just your own ability to not feed that battle of the models, battle of third person perspective stuff. McLean, do you think there's anything I should talk about that I didn't talk about yet? Head to head, can modern art of truth technologies compete against LLMs? So the art of truth technologies are very useful for disabusing yourself of garbage. But what can compete against LLMs? Well, okay, sure. I mean, what I'm putting out there in the world, as a way to think about this, these simple principles to remember, is what needs to compete against LLMs, or the two camps are any kind of algorithm, anything that's deciding for you about something that matters, that is operating on stuff that is not can't be bound to reality. So when you lift a bunch of data out of that context and mix it up like statistics do or whatnot, and then you make a decision based on that, that's where you just get in tons of trouble. And so what we have not tapped into enough, I believe, is that, you know, uh, what you really want. Okay, I'll give a concrete example. In Kathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, there's this problem of that this algorithm was saying, well, we're looking at where all the crime is, and wherever there's crime, we're gonna send more police. And that was just spinning and going. And pretty soon they realized that, like, well, they're just arresting more people in these same neighborhoods. What about everywhere else? Like, you're just going and arresting people in the same neighborhoods. This kind of madness around statistics. I've mentioned this person before. Gerd Geiger Renzar has done some very nice work that shows, and others, that when you give humans representations that they can't situate, they can't use that grounding binding machinery, then we're susceptible to all kinds of madness. But if you can re-represent all that in a way that we can bind, then our sense making becomes very reliable. So all this stuff about like we're mad, we have biases, we're unreliable, that's all tied to bad representations, the wrong representations we're taking in. So in that same example with the police officers, if you imagined instead you gave them a map of like, here's the map of your city you know very well, here's where all the crimes, here's where all the arrests are happening, here's where all the police are going. Everyone would be like, what about all these other places? They would just see it. They'd be like, what's going on here? That's a broken algorithm. They would be able to see for themselves. That makes no sense. Why do we keep going back to that neighborhood? Of course, there's more crimes there. It's where we all are. When we haven't been over here in ages, so, but no one could find this. And they can't find these things. So this is the education I think has to happen, is that, and that I really feel, really, I wish I could clone myself or compel people to like really do this education that this is not about big exotic conscious beings that are taking over mechanical form and Terminator. This is really about the fact that like there are ways we can think with technologies and ways we can't. And what we would really want is to really hold the feet to the fire of people that say we need some these large language models or AIs to solve some problem that can't be solved better by a bunch of people being able to see what's going on, give them visibility. And then on top of that visibility, what you can do once you have all the sensors, just like the weather forecast, you can have very simple to understand things that would say, well, here's the pattern the machine sees, and here's what it has played out a day or two. Like, okay, I see what's going on. Let me just see how this plays out. Like, I don't even care what it is. I just want to see that the storm system coming in. What do you think? I'll be like, I think it's going to do that. Like, good enough for me. It's just a weather forecast. I already know it's not going to work. Or you can do what currently is done. Probably a hybrid now, but to use like real physics to try to do those projections. But no matter how you do it, as long as people can see the pattern and see what the projection is, their own sense making will say that that's a ridiculous projection. Like, you want to work with that ability we have to see what makes sense in the world. And so that's what I proposed, is what we would need to really save the planet. Ironically, 10, 15 years, I got in a big fight with a friend of mine because I was adamant that AI would save the world. And now I'm quite adamant that it's going to destroy. But I was not thinking this. I was coming from the world of the weather forecast. I thought we must have networks everywhere. We need to be able to see the conditions of workers. We need to be monitoring factory farmed animals. We need to see what's going on with people dumping in the backyard and poisoning the streams. We need to get all this and all the data and history. There's a story when I was in grad school studying climate science. They brought in this fellow and he put up one slide, and he's from San Diego remediation. He said, there's one man in front of like a whole warehouse of files. And he said, this guy's in charge for enforcing all of that environmental damage in the county of San Diego right now. Like, that's the work that should all be automated so that those people can't get away with that. So this is not a message about not non-automation. This is a message about like, there's a smart way to do this that is actually easier to understand. And how we're funding all this stuff right now is just ridiculous. We get some billionaire, it's got some crazy idea and thinks they can make lots of money, and then we throw just billions of dollars at something, when instead, this is the real work that we need to be doing right now to leverage technology for our future. And something else came in here. Right around the donut shop. I'm not sure if I understand the reference. Well, let's see. Maybe, I guess, how are you doing, Peter? Last one? Okay. So the last question is, some people seem more open to the processes of truth seeking. My experience in the workplace suggests that it's often an individual's desire for certainty, also expressed as an aversion to complexity, who latch on to what seemed plausible in order to resolve their discomfort. And they can be quite resistant to attempts to point towards other forms of truth. It's one way that propaganda can easily be taken to be truth by many, even in the absence of hard evidence. And what mechanism can work to interrupt this process? Yeah, this is a really big topic. Fortunately, I can't completely unpack it, but we talk about that directly, that there's a mindset, that urgency works against you. And right now, it's going to probably end up being a faith kind of thing, because right now people don't really understand this kind of lateral thinking move, the insight process, and to trust it. There's not a lot of trustworthiness. So we're only at the edge of where it's disrupting my mechanic Newtonian agenda. Like, I've got my, way I want things to go. And then you're asking me to do some lateral thinking or big picture thinking, and all you've done is disrupt that. So, the support for it, is a little tricky, for just like ubiquitous support for it. And this is what, if you read kind of in the trenches of organizational sense making, which is kind of our cousin in the business world, they often gripe about this too. Even different countries are more open to it. This idea of like, I know it's going to slow you down, but it's help you go faster later. You really need to step back and see this big picture, instead of just like faster in the trenches you're already in. So yeah, that disruption of momentum is a real thing for sure, and it does resolve the discomfort, as you put it. So yeah, that's a lot of the heavy lifting we actually end up doing to try to get Inquire out in the world, is to figure out who already is receptive to that message, and figure out how to get it in there where we know people aren't immediately gonna be like, what are you doing? We got work to do. This is not work. So, so I guess that's as promised, the last question. Um, thank you all for giving me stuff to talk about.
All right. And if anyone wants to further inquire with you, Jill, how can they reach out?
Yeah, to stay abreast of everything at Inquire, we have a newsletter you can just sign up for, and we'll announce everything there. It's on our website at inquire.io. And then we also have a contact us form there. We're always open to constructive feedback, and we're trying if things just refining the message as well. And it really there's a drop down. You see the kind of things we'll take inbound for, so you can reach out and hit us there too.
Beautiful. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack in the session. Lots of threads emerge. So probably good for a follow-up inquiry where we all can gather around the digital campfire and
Cool.
inquire what matters most. So yeah, next session at the Stoa is on sacred masculinity in conscious relationships. So you can check that out. And yeah, Jill, everyone, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa today.